I drove 6 hours to walk my only daughter down the aisle, but when I arrived at the gate, I didn't find a welcoming committee. I found a security guard holding a laminated photo of my face with a thick red line drawn through it. Beneath my picture were 4 words that ended my fatherhood forever. Do not let in. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I simply turned my truck around and made one phone call. 4 hours later, the lights went out, the music stopped, and my daughter realized that her perfect day had ended the moment she decided I wasn't good enough to be part of it. Before I tell you how I turned her wedding into a lesson she will never forget, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments if you have ever been ashamed of your family, or if your family has ever been ashamed of you. I want to know your story. My name is William Carter, though most people in this town just call me Bill. At 72 years old, I have hands that feel like sandpaper, and a face that looks like a roadmap of every construction site I have ever managed. To the outside world, I am just an old man in a 1998 Ford F-150 that rattles when it hits 40 miles per hour. To my daughter Sarah, I am an embarrassment, a stain on her perfectly curated image. It was a Saturday morning in June, the kind of day that feels like it was manufactured specifically for weddings. The sky was a piercing blue, the air was warm, and I was wearing the only tuxedo I owned. It was hanging in the back of my truck, wrapped in plastic, swaying gently with every bump in the road. I had bought it 20 years ago for an awards banquet, and it still fit, though perhaps a little tighter around the chest than it used to. I had spent the morning polishing my work boots because I refused to wear those shiny patent leather shoes that pinch your toes. I figured a little black shoe polish would hide the scuffs. I was driving toward Golden Oaks. It is the kind of resort where the grass is cut with scissors and the water in the fountains is dyed a supernatural shade of blue. It is the most expensive venue in the state. It costs $50,000 just to unlock the front doors. My daughter Sarah had told me the wedding was being paid for by her fiancé Jason. She told me Jason was a tech entrepreneur, a visionary, a man who moved mountains with his mind. She told me his family was American royalty. She lied. I turned off the main highway and onto the private drive lined with cypress trees. My old truck chugged and sputtered, a dinosaur entering a world of Teslas and Mercedes. I could see the valet stand ahead, staffed by young men in white jackets, who looked like they had never held a shovel in their lives. I felt a swell of pride in my chest. Not because of the luxury, but because my little girl was getting married. Despite the distance that had grown between us over the last few years, despite the missed calls and the short visits, I was still her father. I had a check in my pocket for $50,000. It was my wedding gift to her, a down payment on a house, or so I thought. I pulled up to the security checkpoint. It wasn't a simple gate. It was a fortress of limestone and iron. A security guard stepped out of the booth. He was a large man wearing a uniform that was too tight with sunglasses that hid his eyes. He didn't look at me. He looked at my truck. He looked at the rust on the fender. He looked at the oil stain I was probably leaving on their pristine pavement. He raised a hand, palm out, stopping me before I could even roll down the window. I rolled it down anyway. The air conditioning in my truck had broken 3 years ago, and I was starting to sweat. Name, the guard barked. He didn't ask. He demanded. William Carter, I said, smiling. I am the father of the bride. The guard didn't check a list. He didn't look at a computer screen. He didn't smile back. Instead, he reached under his counter and pulled out a clipboard. He held it up to my face. Clipped to the board was a photograph. It was a picture of me taken from a distance, probably with a cell phone zoom. I was wearing my denim overalls, standing on the porch of my cabin, holding a wrench. It wasn't a flattering picture. But what drew my eye wasn't the photo itself. It was the thick red marker line slashed diagonally across my face, and the text written in bold, angry letters at the bottom. Banned. Do not admit. If cited, call police immediately. I stared at the image. My brain refused to process it. It was like looking at a foreign language. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice calm, though my hands had started to grip the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were turning white. "I am Sarah's father, Sarah Carter, the bride." "There is no mistake, old man," the guard said. He leaned in closer, and I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "I have strict orders from Miss Sarah and Mr. Jason. No construction workers, no hillbillies, and definitely no one driving a heap of junk like this. You are ruining the aesthetic." The aesthetic. That was the word he used. My presence, my existence was a blemish on the visual perfection of my daughter's day. "Turn around," the guard commanded, pointing back toward the highway. "Before you leak any more oil on my driveway. If you are not gone in 30 seconds, I am radioing the sheriff. And trust me, you do not want to spend the night in a cell at your age." I sat there, the engine of my truck idling with a rough, rhythmic thumping. I looked past the guard up the winding drive toward the main clubhouse. I could see the white tents set up on the lawn. I could see the florists carrying massive arrangements of white hydrangeas. I could see the life I had paid for, though they didn't know it yet. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I picked it up. It was a text message from Sarah. I opened it, hoping for an explanation, hoping for an apology, hoping that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, and she was texting me to ask where I was. The message was long, and it was cruel. "Dad, please don't make a scene. I saw your truck turning onto the road. Please just go home. Jason's parents are here, and they are elite. They are sophisticated people. If they see you, if they see that truck, if they see your rough hands and your cheap suit, it will destroy everything. You don't fit in this world, Dad. You never have. Please let me have this one day of perfection. I will send you photos later. Just go." I read the message twice. Then I read it a third time. She didn't say she loved me. She didn't say she was sorry. She said I would destroy everything. She said I didn't fit. I looked at the guard. He was tapping his watch, a smug grin on his face. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed the power of turning away a man who clearly didn't belong. He thought he was the gatekeeper of paradise, protecting the beautiful people from the unwashed masses. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't try to explain that I had built the foundation this guard booth stood on 20 years ago. I didn't tell him that I knew the owner of this resort by his first name. I simply nodded. "Understood," I said. I put the truck in reverse. I backed up slowly, carefully. I turned the wheel, the tires crunching on the gravel. I drove back down the cypress-lined avenue, watching the white tents disappear in my rearview mirror. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the silence to think. I needed the silence to process the fact that the little girl I had carried on my shoulders, the girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the girl I had put through college by working double shifts in the freezing rain, had just erased me from her life. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were rough. They were stained with decades of oil paint and cement. Sarah was right about that. These hands were not sophisticated. These hands built things. These hands fixed things. But today, these hands had been rejected. My mind drifted back to a week ago. The memory was sharp and painful, like a stone in my shoe. Sarah had brought Jason to meet me for the first time. It was a surprise visit. I was at my cabin, a small wooden house on 3 acres of land near the river. It wasn't a mansion. It was a home. I had built it myself, plank by plank, after my wife Catherine passed away. It was my sanctuary. Jason had pulled up in a rented Porsche. He stepped out wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. He looked at my cabin with a sneer that he didn't bother to hide. "So this is the shack," Jason had said. He didn't say hello. He didn't shake my hand. He just looked at my home and called it a shack. Sarah laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "I know," she said, grabbing Jason's arm. "I keep telling him to sell it. The land is worth something even if the house is garbage. We could use that money, Jason. Imagine if we put it into your crypto project. Dad would finally be useful. I was standing right there. I was holding a tray of lemonade I had just made for them. I heard every word. Useful. That was what I was to them. A resource. A potential bank account wrapped in old skin and denim. That day I had swallowed my pride. I had served them lemonade. I had listened to Jason brag about his tech company, about his algorithms, about his future billions. I had listened to Sarah agree with everything he said, looking at him with eyes that were blind to his arrogance. Dad, Sarah had said before they left that day, about the wedding. We are keeping it small. Just close friends. Maybe it is better if you don't worry about the travel. It is a long drive for an old man. I had insisted. I told her I wouldn't miss it for the world. I told her I had saved up. I told her I wanted to be there. She had sighed. Fine. But please, Dad, try to look presentable. Now, driving away from the Golden Oaks, I realized that presentable was never the goal. The goal was invisibility. She wanted me to disappear. She wanted the money she thought I could provide by selling my home, but she didn't want the man who came with it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the check for $50,000. It was a cashier's check, hard cash. I looked at it for a moment, then I tore it in half. Then I tore it in half again. I opened the window and let the pieces of paper fly out into the wind. They scattered like confetti along the highway. I wasn't sad anymore. The sadness had evaporated the moment I saw that red line across my face. What was left was something colder, something harder. It was the clarity of a man who examines a blueprint and realizes the structure is unsound. When a building has a rotten foundation, you don't paint over it. You don't try to patch it. You tear it down. I reached for my phone again. I wasn't going to call Sarah. I wasn't going to beg for entry. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Mr. Henderson. Henderson was my lawyer. But he was more than that. He was the keeper of my secrets. He was the man who managed the Carter Trust. See, Sarah and Jason made a fatal miscalculation. They judged me by my truck. They judged me by my overalls. They assumed that because I lived simply, I was simple. They assumed that because I lived in a cabin, I was poor. They didn't know that I had retired from construction 10 years ago because I had sold my company for $8 million. They didn't know that I owned 3 apartment complexes in the city. They didn't know that I was the silent majority shareholder of the hospitality group that owned the Golden Oaks Resort. I pressed the call button. Henderson answered on the second ring. Bill, is everything all right? The ceremony should be starting soon. It is not starting, Henderson, I said. My voice was steady. I want you to pull the file on the Golden Oaks event for today. The Sarah Carter and Jason Miller wedding. I have it right here, Henderson said. You paid the invoice in full last month, $200,000, under the anonymous donor clause, just like you asked. Sarah thinks Jason's family paid for it. Correction, I said. I want you to activate Clause 14C of the sponsorship agreement. There was a pause on the line. I could hear Henderson shuffling papers. Clause 14C. Bill, are you sure? That is the immediate revocation clause. It states that funding can be withdrawn instantly if the benefactor is insulted, refused entry, or treated with indignity by the beneficiaries. It is the nuclear option. I am sure, I said. I was refused entry. I was banned. There is a poster of my face at the security gate. Good God, Henderson whispered. His tone shifted from professional to furious. They did what? Shut it down, Henderson. I want you to call the venue manager. I want you to call the catering company. I want you to call the florists. Tell them the credit card on file has been reported stolen. Tell them the funding is pulled. Tell them to stop everything. Right now. Bill, the wedding is in progress. The guests are seated. If we do this, it will be chaos, I know, I said. I looked at the road stretching out before me. Do it. And Henderson. Yes, Bill. Call the resort management. Tell them I want access to the security camera feed. If I can't be there to see my daughter's big day, I want to watch it from my iPad. Consider it done, Henderson said. I hung up the phone. I was 20 minutes from home. 20 minutes until I could pour myself a drink, sit in my favorite chair, and watch the house of cards collapse. They wanted a wedding without me. They were about to get exactly what they asked for. But they forgot one thing. A wedding costs money, and the bank of Dad had just closed its doors forever. I pulled into the dirt driveway of my cabin. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the porch. It was peaceful here. The river flowed quietly in the distance. The birds were singing. It was a stark contrast to the storm I had just unleashed. I walked inside and didn't even turn on the lights. I went straight to the wall safe behind the painting of the old mill. I spun the dial. Click, click, click. The heavy door swung open. Inside were the deeds, the certificates, the proof of a lifetime of hard labor and smart investments. I took out the folder labeled Sarah. It contained the trust fund documents I had set up for her. A trust that would have given her a monthly allowance for the rest of her life. A trust that would have ensured she never had to worry about bills or rent or medical expenses. I took the folder to my desk. I opened the drawer and took out a red stamp. It was the stamp I used for rejected construction bids. Void. I stamped the first page, then the second, then the third. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper was loud in the quiet room. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't anger. It was housekeeping. I was cleaning up the mess. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of whiskey. It wasn't the expensive stuff Jason drank. It was the cheap stuff that burns on the way down. It tasted like truth. I sat down in my leather armchair and opened my iPad. I logged into the secure server for the Golden Oaks Resort. Henderson had worked fast. The login credentials were already in my inbox. I selected the camera feed for the grand ballroom. The image flickered to life. It was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling. Tables were set with gold-rimmed plates and crystal glasses. Waiters were moving through the crowd with trays of champagne. I saw Sarah. She was standing near the head table looking radiant. She was laughing, holding a glass of wine, her other hand resting on Jason's arm. She looked happy. She looked relieved. She thought the problem me had been dealt with. I saw Jason. He was puffing out his chest, talking to a group of men, probably trying to sell them on some imaginary investment. He looked like he owned the place. I saw an older couple sitting next to them. A man in a tuxedo and a woman in a sequined gown. They looked distinguished. They looked wealthy. They must be the elite parents Sarah had told me about. I zoomed in. There was something odd about them. They didn't look at Jason with pride. They looked at their watches. They looked bored. They looked like they were on the clock. I took a sip of whiskey. Then it happened. On the screen, the massive crystal chandelier above the dance floor flickered. Once. Twice. Then it went dark. The music, which had been a soft orchestral swell, cut out abruptly with a screech of feedback. The room plunged into a twilight gloom lit only by the emergency exit signs and the few candles on the tables. I saw heads turn. I saw the confusion ripple through the crowd like a wheel. I saw Sarah's smile vanish. She tapped her microphone. Nothing. She looked around, her face twisting into a mask of irritation. Then a man in a dark suit walked onto the stage. I recognized him. It was Mr. Sterling, the general manager of the resort. He didn't have a microphone, so he cupped his hands around his mouth. I turned up the volume on my iPad. The security microphones were sensitive. I could hear the murmur of the crowd die down as Sterling began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling shouted, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "I apologize for the interruption. However, we have just received notification that the funding for this event has been withdrawn. The credit line has been canceled by the account holder." I saw Sarah drop her wineglass. It shattered on the dance floor, red liquid splashing onto her white dress like a wound. "This is a private facility," Sterling continued, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Without payment, we cannot continue services. The kitchen has been closed. The bar is closed. We are asking all guests to please vacate the premises within 15 minutes. The room exploded into chaos. Sarah lunged at Sterling. I could hear her screaming, her voice shrill and panicked. "What are you talking about? My husband paid for this. Check the card again." Sterling held up a tablet. He showed her the screen. "The payment was made by the Carter Trust, ma'am. The authorization came from Mr. William Carter. He has reported the transaction as unauthorized use of funds and issued a stop payment order." I watched Sarah's face. The color drained out of it so fast, she looked like a ghost. "My father," she whispered. The microphone picked it up perfectly. "My father doesn't have any money. He lives in a shack." "I don't know about that, ma'am," Sterling said, stepping back to avoid her grasping hands. "I only know that the Carter Trust owns a significant portion of this resort, and Mr. Carter's word is law here. You have 14 minutes left." I took another sip of whiskey. The burn was good. This was just the beginning. The lights were out, but the real show was about to start. Sarah was about to learn that when you ban the man who built the foundation, the whole house comes crashing down. I stepped inside the cabin and let the heavy oak door click shut behind me. The silence was immediate and absolute. I did not reach for the light switch. I did not need to see the worn rug or the chipped paint on the walls to know where I was. I knew every inch of this floor because I had laid it myself 40 years ago. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, the moonlight filtering through the dusty blinds, casting long, jail bar shadows across the room. To anyone looking through the window, this was just the sad, dark living room of a lonely widower who had nothing left but memories. They were wrong. I walked through the shadows to the study at the back of the house. There was a painting on the far wall, a simple watercolor of the lake my wife Catherine had painted 3 months before she died. I moved it aside gently, my fingers brushing the frame with a habit born of grief. Behind it sat a Titan steel safe bolted directly into the load-bearing studs of the house. It was cold to the touch. I spun the dial. Left to 24, right to 10, left to 72. The numbers were the date I laid the first brick of my first company. The tumblers clicked into place with a sound like a loaded gun. I pulled the heavy handle down. The door swung open, and the smell of old paper and cold steel filled the room. Inside, there were no stacks of cash. There were no gold bars. There was something far more dangerous. Information. I pulled out a leather-bound portfolio. I set it on the desk and turned on a single small brass lamp. The pool of yellow light illuminated the documents that Sarah believed did not exist. The first document was a deed. Not for this cabin, but for the Skyline Heights apartment complex downtown. 300 units, fully occupied, debt-free. I turned the page. A majority shareholder certificate for Carter Construction Holdings. The company I supposedly sold for scraps, but actually converted into a passive income empire that generated $40,000 a month in dividends alone. My daughter thought I lived on a pension check and Social Security. She thought the reason I drove a 20-year-old truck was that I couldn't afford a new payment. She never understood that wealth isn't loud. Wealth is quiet. Wealth is having the freedom to not care what a security guard thinks of your boots. Then I reached for the blue folder, the one that mattered tonight. I opened it. On the top was the invoice for the Golden Oaks Resort wedding package, $212,000, paid in full via wire transfer 3 months ago. At the bottom of the page was a signature line. It did not say Jason Miller. It did not say the Miller family. It was signed William Carter, and right next to it was the addendum I had insisted on. The privacy clause. It stated that the source of the funding must remain anonymous to the bride and groom unless a breach of contract occurred. I ran my thumb over the signature. Sarah had called me crying months ago, saying Jason's funds were tied up in overseas investments, and they needed a deposit to secure the date. She had lied. Jason didn't have funds tied up. He was broke. I knew because I had run a credit check on him the day they got engaged. I had paid for this wedding not because I was a fool, but because I wanted my daughter to have her dream even if she was marrying a nightmare. I had saved her from humiliation. I had covered her fiancé's lies. I had literally paved the road she was walking on today. And her thank you was a photo of my face at the security gate telling the world I was unwanted trash. I dug deeper into the safe and pulled out one last document. It was a commercial lease agreement. It was the master lease for the land the Golden Oaks Resort stood on. I had bought the acreage 30 years ago when it was just swamp and timber. I leased it to the resort management company on a 99-year term. I wasn't just the man who paid for the party. I was the landlord of the very soil Sarah was standing on right now. If I wanted to, I could technically evict the entire resort, though that would take months of court battles. But I didn't need to do that. I just needed to stop the music. I looked at the papers spread out under the lamp. They were proof of a life spent building, saving, and protecting. They were the legacy I had built for Sarah. And tonight she had rejected the builder but tried to keep the building. I looked at the clause again. Clause 14C, breach of conduct. It gave the benefactor the right to terminate the event immediately if the venue or the guests acted in a way that dishonored the donor. Banning the man who wrote the check was definitely a dishonor. I wasn't just an old man in a truck anymore. In this room under this lamp, I was the institution. I was the bank. I was the CEO. And I was about to call in a debt that could not be paid. I closed the folder. The sound was final. It was the sound of a gavel hitting the block. It was time to make the call. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk, past the old blueprints and the faded tax returns from 1999. My hand closed around a thick manila envelope that had been delivered to my doorstep 3 days ago via private courier. It had no return address, just a red stamp that read confidential. I had resisted opening it until now. A part of me, the part that was just a father who wanted to walk his little girl down the aisle, had wanted to believe the fairy tale. I wanted to believe that Jason really was the tech visionary Sarah claimed he was. I wanted to believe that she had found a partner who could provide for her the way I always had. But the builder in me, the man who knows that you never pour concrete until you have tested the soil, knew better. I had hired Reynolds, the best private investigator in the state, a month ago, when Sarah started asking me for large sums of cash to cover investment opportunities Jason had found. I pulled the tab on the envelope. The sound of the paper tearing was sharp in the quiet room. I slid the contents out onto the desk right next to the deed to the resort. It was a dossier. A thick stack of paper clipped together, smelling of toner and cold hard facts. The first page was a summary. A background check on one Jason Alexander Miller. I scanned the basic information. Date of birth, social security number, last known address. It wasn't the penthouse apartment Sarah had bragged about. It was a sublet in a transient neighborhood near the airport. Then I got to the employment history. Sarah had told me Jason was the CEO of a company called Nebulous Systems. She said they were revolutionizing the blockchain. She used words like synergy and disruption. I looked at the report. Reynolds was thorough. Occupation, unemployed. Previous employment, shift supervisor at a car rental agency, terminated for cause. Sales associate at a cell phone kiosk, quit after 3 months. There was no Nebulous Systems. There was no tech empire. There was just a website registered on a free domain host 3 months ago, populated with stock photos of people shaking hands in glass conference rooms. The CEO headshot wasn't even Jason. It was a model from a stock image library. I turned the page and felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The financial section. This was where the fairy tale turned into a horror story. Jason didn't have millions. He had debt. Massive, suffocating, life-ending debt. The report listed judgments from 3 different credit card companies totaling over $80,000. But that was the clean debt. That was the debt you handle in bankruptcy court. The next page listed the dirty debt. Reynolds had dug deep. He had found the gambling records, Atlantic City, online sports betting sites based in the Caribbean, underground poker rooms in the city. Jason was a gambler, and he was a bad one. Total estimated liabilities to unlicensed lenders, $540,000. I stared at the number. $500,000. This wasn't just bad money management. This was a death sentence. I realized with a jolt of clarity exactly what this wedding was. It wasn't a celebration of love. It was a fundraising event. Jason wasn't marrying my daughter because he cherished her. He was marrying her because he needed the cash gifts. He needed access to her credit score, which was still pristine thanks to my guidance. He needed a wife he could use as a shield against the people who break legs for a living. I flipped through the photos attached to the file. Grainy shots of Jason arguing with men in leather jackets outside a pool hall. Photos of him pawning a Rolex watch. Photos of him driving a rented Lamborghini, the same one he had driven to my house to mock me, and then returning it an hour later to avoid the extra mileage fees. He was a hollow man, a shell of ego and desperation painted over with a thin layer of arrogance. And my daughter, my smart, ambitious Sarah, had fallen for it, hook, line, and sinker. She had looked at his rented suit and his leased car and seen a prince. She had looked at my paid-for truck and my paid-for land and seen a peasant. I felt a surge of anger so hot it made my vision blur. I wanted to drive back to the resort, kick down the doors, and drag him out by his collar. I wanted to expose him right there in the middle of the dance floor. But then I turned the page to the section titled The Parents. This was the knife twist. This was the part that turned my anger into something freezing cold. Sarah had been so specific about Jason's parents. She had told me they were old money. The type of people who summer in the Hamptons and winter in Aspen. She said they were sophisticated, cultured, the kind of people who wouldn't understand a man like me. That was her justification for the sign at the gate. She was protecting their delicate sensibilities from the sight of her blue-collar father. I looked at the dossier. Reynolds had identified the couple sitting at the head table right now. The man was not an oil tycoon. His name was Gary. He was a retired high school drama teacher who did local commercials for car dealerships. I recognized him now. He was the guy who yelled about low financing rates on the local cable channel at 2 a.m. The woman was not a socialite. Her name was Linda. She was a former hostess who picked up extra work through a casting agency for distinguished seniors. Booking fee, $200 per hour plus meals. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The silence of the cabin felt heavy, pressing against my eardrums. My daughter had abandoned her real father, the man who had held her hand when she got stitches, the man who had paid for her braces, the man who had taught her how to ride a bike to make room for 2 actors hired from a catalog. She had traded flesh and blood for props. She was ashamed of me. She was ashamed of the sawdust on my clothes and the calluses on my hands. She wanted a fantasy so badly that she was willing to cut out the only real thing in her life to get it. The anger I had felt moments ago began to recede, leaving behind a vast, empty pity. It was a cold, clinical pity. I looked at the photo of Sarah clipped to the file. She looked so happy in the picture, oblivious to the shark swimming next to her. She thought she had won the lottery. She thought she was ascending into the elite class. She was actually walking into a trap, Jason was going to drain her dry. He was going to take every penny I had given her over the years. He was going to ruin her credit mortgage, her future, and leave her with nothing but debt and regret. If I went there now and stopped the wedding by force, she would hate me. She would say I was jealous. She would say I was trying to ruin her happiness. She wouldn't believe the dossier. She would say I forged it. She was too deep in the delusion. I realized then that I couldn't save her from the fall. I could only choose when to pull the safety net away. She had called me a simple man. She had mocked my intellect. She thought she was smarter than me because she worked in marketing and I worked in dirt. But she couldn't see a con artist standing 3 feet in front of her. I picked up the photo of the fake parents again. Gary and Linda. They were probably eating the lobster thermidor I had paid for right now. They were drinking the vintage champagne I had authorized. They were playing their roles perfectly, smiling and nodding, checking their watches, waiting for their shift to end so they could collect their check and go home. And Sarah. She was beaming at them, desperate for their approval, desperate to be accepted into a family that didn't exist. It was pathetic. It was the most tragic thing I had ever seen. My eyes moved to the bottom of the dossier where Reynolds had stapled a printout of Jason's text messages. He had managed to clone Jason's phone for a brief window. The texts were from yesterday. From Jason to a contact named Vinny, "Don't worry about the payment. The wedding is tomorrow." The old man gave her a fat check, plus the cash gifts. "I'll have your $50K by Monday. Just call off the dogs." From Sarah to Jason, I handled my dad. "He won't be coming. I told security to keep him out. I don't want him embarrassing your parents." From Jason to Sarah, "Good girl. We don't need that trash around us. We are building an empire, babe." Trash. That is what he called me. And she agreed. Good girl, he called her. Like she was a dog he had trained to bite the hand that fed her. I closed the dossier. The pity hardened into resolve. I wasn't just an excluded father anymore. I was the judge, and the verdict was guilty. She wanted to live in a fantasy fine. I would let the fantasy play out until the lights went off. I would let her stand in the dark with her fake husband and her fake in-laws. I would let her feel the cold reality of the world she had chosen. I wasn't doing this to be cruel. I was doing this because it was the only lesson she would ever understand. You cannot build a life on lies. You cannot build a future on debt. And you certainly cannot build happiness by discarding the people who love you. I looked at the phone on my desk. It was time to make the call to Henderson. It was time to cut the power. It was time to show Sarah exactly what her empire was worth when the Bank of Dad stopped making deposits. I reached for the receiver. My hand was steady. I didn't feel like crying anymore. I felt like working. And tonight, my work was demolition. I was going to bring the whole house down, brick by fake brick. I picked up the receiver of the landline on my desk. It was an old, heavy black phone, the kind that feels like a weapon in your hand. I dialed Arthur Henderson's private mobile number. I didn't need to look it up. I had memorized it 20 years ago when he helped me navigate the zoning wars that allowed me to build the very resort where my daughter was currently celebrating her exclusion of me. The line rang once, twice, then a click. Bill Henderson's voice came through crisp and professional, though I could hear the faint hum of background noise. He was likely in his home office monitoring the situation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. He knew me too well to think I would just drive away into the sunset. "It is time, Arthur," I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't waver. It sounded like it did when I used to call a foreman to tear down a framing job that wasn't up to code. Flat. Final. There was a pause on the other end. A long, heavy silence. "You want to execute Clause 14C?" Henderson asked. He didn't sound surprised, just resigned. He was a good lawyer. He knew that when a contract is breached, the remedy must be enforced. "Execute it," I confirmed. "But I do not just want the funding pulled. I want a complete facility lockout. We are moving from a sponsorship withdrawal to a hostile shutdown. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on the dossier of Jason's lies. Walk me through the kill switch, Arthur. I want to know exactly what is going to happen. Henderson cleared his throat. I could hear the rustle of papers. All right, Bill. I have the master control agreement for Golden Oaks open. As the majority shareholder of the holding company, you have executive override on all facility operations. Step 1 is the financial severance. I am logging into the merchant portal right now. I waited. I took a sip of whiskey. Done, Henderson said. The master account linked to the event has been frozen. The credit limit has been set to 0. Any further charges attempted by the venue staff for drinks overtime or incidentals will be declined instantly. The open bar tab is now a dead account. Good, I said. Now the infrastructure. I want the room dead, Arthur. I am contacting the facility manager Dave on the other line, Henderson said. His voice was typing as he spoke. I am issuing a code red override. This instructs the engineering team to isolate the power grid for the grand ballroom. We are not cutting the emergency lights. We don't want a lawsuit for injuries, but the main stage power, the audio-visual circuits, and the atmospheric lighting are being cut. How long, I asked. 90 seconds, Henderson replied. Dave is at the breaker panel. He is just waiting for my confirmation code. Give it to him, I said. And the sound. The sound system is on a separate loop, Henderson explained. We are remotely revoking the digital license for the DJ's interface. His console is going to lock up. The microphones will mute. The speakers will cut. Silence, Bill. Absolute silence. And the food, I asked. I paid $50,000 for a 5-course meal. I don't want Jason or his fake parents taking a single bite of the entree. The catering manager is getting the call now, Henderson said. The order is to cease service immediately. The waitstaff is being instructed to clear the tables. If the food hasn't been served, it stays in the warming ovens. If it is on the table, it gets bussed. The contract states that upon funding cancellation, all unconsumed inventory remains the property of the vendor. They aren't going to feed a party that isn't paying. I looked at the screen of my iPad. The party was still in full swing. Sarah was laughing. Jason was pouring champagne. They looked so secure, so untouchable. One more thing, Arthur, I said. The honeymoon suite. The presidential villa. Ah, Henderson said. The jewel of the resort. Lock it out, I ordered. I want their keycards deactivated. I want the reservation wiped from the system. I want security to flag their names. If they try to go up there tonight to hide or to sleep, or to consummate this farce of a marriage, I want the red light to flash on the door. I want them standing in the hallway with their luggage, realizing they have nowhere to go. It is done, Bill Henderson said softly. I just sent the command to the central server. The keys are plastic scrap. The room has been released back into inventory. I took a deep breath. It was a strange sensation wielding this kind of invisible power. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't making a scene. I was sitting in a dark cabin miles away, flipping switches that would dismantle my daughter's world. It felt like surgery, necessary, painful, and precise. Bill Henderson said, his voice breaking his professional detachment for a moment. Are you sure? Once I give Dave the final go-ahead on the power, there is no unringing this bell. The humiliation will be public. It will be total. I looked at the photo of me on the clipboard that the guard had held up. Banned. Do not let in. They wanted me out, Arthur, I said. They wanted to erase me. I am just giving them what they wanted. A wedding completely free of my influence, which means a wedding free of my money, my property, and my protection. I understand, Henderson said. Executing sequence now. I heard him typing furiously. Financials terminated, he listed off. Catering stop order issued. Security alerted to remove unauthorized guests once the contract is voided, and power cut initiated. I watched the screen. "It's happening," Henderson said. "Goodbye, Bill. Call me if you need bail money, though I suspect Jason is the one who will need it." I hung up the phone. I stared at the iPad. The delay on the feed was only a few seconds. I saw the moment the order hit the system. I saw the chandeliers flicker. I saw the lights die. I saw the darkness swallow the room, leaving only the terrified faces illuminated by the flickering candles. It was done. The builder had pulled the cornerstone. Now I just had to watch the collapse. I poured another 2 fingers of whiskey into my glass and leaned closer to the iPad screen. The feed from camera 4 offered a panoramic view of the grand ballroom, a high-angle shot that made the guests look like chess pieces on a very expensive board. It was a scene of absolute manufactured perfection. The floral centerpieces were towering sculptures of white orchids and hydrangeas costing $300 a table. The linens were crushed velvet in a shade of champagne that Sarah had insisted was essential for the ambiance. The light from the crystal chandeliers refracted through the room, creating a shimmering golden haze that softened the edges of reality. It was beautiful. It was expensive. And it was entirely fraudulent. I zoomed in on the head table. There was Jason standing up holding a flute of Dom Perignon. Even through the digital feed, I could see the sheen of sweat on his forehead. He was in his element, or at least the element he desperately pretended to belong to. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him a little too well, likely tailored within an inch of its life to hide the fact that he was a man crumbling under the weight of $500,000 in debt. He was gesturing expansively with his free hand, addressing a group of men at the adjacent table. These weren't friends. I recognized one of them. It was the local Lexus dealer. Jason wasn't celebrating his marriage. He was networking. He was pitching. I turned up the volume on the iPad. The ambient noise of clinking silverware and polite laughter filled my quiet cabin. I could catch snippets of Jason's voice, loud and brash, cutting through the murmur. "Blockchain integration," he was saying, pumping his fist slightly. "We are talking about a paradigm shift in how assets are liquidated. Nebulous Systems isn't just a company, gentlemen. It is a movement. You get in on the ground floor now, and in 6 months you are looking at a 10x return. Conservative estimate." He took a swig of champagne, not sipping it like a gentleman, but gulping it like a man who needed the liquid courage. He looked manic. His eyes darted around the room, scanning the exits, scanning the faces, perhaps looking for the debt collectors he knew were circling. But to the room, he was the picture of young, aggressive success. He was selling the dream, and everyone was buying it because the venue was so opulent, the wine was so good, and the lie was so pretty. Then the camera panned slightly to the left, and I saw Sarah. My heart didn't break. It had already broken at the gate. Now it just felt heavy like a stone sinking in mud. She looked radiant. Her dress was a Vera Wang custom-designed silk and lace costing more than my first car. She had her hand resting on the table displaying the diamond ring Jason had bought on credit that was likely secured against her own social security number without her knowledge. She wasn't looking at Jason with love. She was looking at him with triumph. She was scanning the room, and her eyes soaking in the envy of her bridesmaids, the approval of the guests, the sheer magnitude of the event. She was smiling the smile of someone who believes they have pulled off the heist of the century. She had successfully exorcised her past. She had scrubbed away the blue-collar stain of her upbringing. There were no rough hands here. No old trucks. No embarrassing fathers in denim. Just gold crystal and the illusion of aristocracy. She turned to the woman sitting next to her, Linda, the actress, hired for $200 an hour. Sarah leaned in and whispered something, laughing softly. Linda laughed back, a practiced hollow sound, and patted Sarah's hand. It was a performance within a performance. Sarah was desperate for this woman's approval, desperate to be accepted by this fake matriarch of a fake dynasty. She was preening under the attention of a stranger she thought was her mother-in-law. It was excruciating to watch. It was like watching a child play house in a building that was on fire. I watched as a waiter approached the head table with a silver tray. He placed a plate of filet mignon in front of Jason. I knew that steak. It was Japanese A5 Wagyu, $80 a pound. I had approved the invoice myself. Jason picked up his knife and fork, sawing into the meat with an aggression that betrayed his nerves. He ate quickly, almost frantically, as if he was afraid someone was going to snatch the plate away before he could finish. Sarah took a delicate bite of her lobster. She looked around the room again, her gaze lingering on the empty chair at the back of the room where I should have been sitting. But she didn't look sad. She looked relieved. She raised her glass in a silent toast to herself. She had done it. She had curated her life to perfection. I looked at the timestamp on the security feed. It was 7:42 p.m. Henderson had said the kill switch would execute in 90 seconds. That was 2 minutes ago. The delay in the feed meant it was happening right now. In the video, Jason stood up again. He tapped his glass with a spoon. The sharp pinging sound echoed through the iPad speakers. The room quieted down. He adjusted his bow tie, puffing out his chest. He looked like a rooster crowing on a pile of debt. "I want to propose a toast," Jason announced, his voice booming. "To the future, to building empires, and to family, the kind of family that matches our ambition." Sarah beamed. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears of joy. She truly believed she had won. She believed this moment was the start of her golden age. I took a sip of my cheap whiskey and swallowed it down. "Enjoy the toast, Jason," I whispered to the empty room. "Because you are about to find out that empires built on other people's money have a nasty habit of collapsing when the rent comes due." On the screen, the massive crystal chandelier above their heads gave a sudden, violent flicker. It wasn't a subtle dimming. It was a spasm. The light surged brighter for a fraction of a second, illuminating the greed and the fear on Jason's face in harsh white clarity. And then everything went black. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical weight that dropped onto the room with the force of a hammer. For 3 seconds, there was absolute silence. No breath, no movement, just the shock of a world that had suddenly ceased to exist. Then the screaming started. It wasn't the scream of people in mortal danger. It was the scream of entitlement being denied. It was the sound of 200 people realizing their comfort had been snatched away without permission. I watched on the iPad screen as the infrared night vision on the security cameras kicked in, turning the scene into a ghostly, greenish monochrome. Jason was still standing with his glass raised, frozen, like a statue. He tapped the microphone. Thump, thump. Nothing. The feedback loop was dead. His voice, moments ago booming with arrogance about empires and blockchain, was now just a small, insignificant sound in a very large, very dark room. Then the emergency lights flickered on. They weren't the soft golden sconces of the ballroom. They were harsh industrial halogen beams mounted above the exit doors. They cast long, jagged shadows across the tables, turning the floral arrangements into strange, looming monsters and making the guests' faces look gaunt and terrified. The illusion of the fairy tale was gone. What was left was a warehouse full of confused people in expensive clothes. I saw the service doors swing open. A phalanx of waitstaff marched in. They weren't carrying trays of food. They were pushing bus tubs. They moved with military precision, instructed by the order Henderson had sent. They began clearing the tables immediately. I saw a waiter snatch a bottle of wine from a table before a guest could pour a second glass. I saw another slide a plate of untouched appetizers right out from under a bridesmaid's nose. The murmur of the crowd grew into a roar of indignation. What is going on? Where is the power? Why are they taking the food? Then the man I had been waiting for appeared. Mr. Sterling, the general manager, walked onto the center of the dance floor. He didn't need a microphone. He had the kind of voice that could cut through concrete. He held a tablet in one hand and a megaphone in the other, though he didn't raise it yet. He looked up at the head table directly at Jason and Sarah. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling shouted. The room quieted down, not out of respect, but out of confusion. "May I have your attention, please? This event has been terminated effective immediately." Sarah stood up so fast her chair fell over backward with a loud crash. She navigated through the gloom, her white dress looking gray in the emergency lighting. She rushed to the edge of the stage, looking down at Sterling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "Terminated!" she shrieked. Her voice cracked. "Are you insane? Do you know who we are? My husband paid for this entire night. Turn the lights back on right now, or I will sue you for every penny you have." Sterling didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He looked at her with the weary expression of a man who deals with tantrums for a living, but finally has the authority to end one. "Mrs. Miller," Sterling said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "Your husband did not pay for this event. The invoice for the Golden Oaks Grand Package totaling $212,000 was paid by the Carter Trust." A ripple went through the crowd. I saw heads turn. People were whispering. "Carter, isn't that her maiden name?" Sarah froze. "The Carter Trust, that's my father. But that's impossible. He doesn't have that kind of money. He's a construction worker." "I cannot speak to your father's profession, ma'am," Sterling said, tapping his tablet screen. "I can only speak to the fact that William Carter is the account holder. And 10 minutes ago, Mr. Carter issued a formal stop payment order on all funds associated with this event, due to a breach of contract." "Breach of contract?" Sarah stammered. She looked back at Jason, who had slumped into his chair, his face buried in his hands. "What breach?" Sterling looked up at her, and even through the grainy camera feed, I could see the cold satisfaction in his eyes. "Clause 14C, Sterling announced to the room. "The donor reserves the right to withdraw funding if they are denied access to the event or treated with indignity. We received a report from Gate Security that Mr. Carter was barred from entering the premises on your specific orders. He was turned away at the gate." The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the ballroom. The guests turned to look at each other. The whispers became louder, sharper. "She banned her own father. The guy who paid for all this. I thought she said her husband was a crypto millionaire." Sarah looked around, her eyes wide with panic. She was losing the narrative. The story she had spun for years, the story of the self-made woman marrying the tech genius, was unraveling in real time. "That's a lie," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Sterling. "My dad is a broke old man. He lives in a shack. He couldn't pay for a coffee, let alone this wedding. Jason paid. Jason, tell them." She turned to Jason. She grabbed his shoulder and shook him. "Jason, tell him, show him the receipt, show him the bank transfer." Jason looked up. His face was pale, slick with sweat. He looked like a cornered animal. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at the exit signs. "Jason," Sarah whispered. The microphone on the head table had been cut, but the ambient mics caught her voice perfectly. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Jason stood up slowly. He adjusted his jacket, but his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't straighten the lapels. "There was a mix-up with the bank," Jason mumbled. It was weak. It was pathetic. "My funds are overseas. The transfer must have bounced. I told your dad to cover the deposit just in case." "The deposit?" Sterling laughed. It was a harsh, dry sound. "Mr. Miller, the Carter Trust paid the full balance 3 months ago. You haven't paid a dime. In fact, the credit card you put on file for incidentals was declined an hour ago for a $10 charge at the lobby bar." The humiliation was total. It was absolute. 200 people watched as the golden boy crumbled into dust. The man who claimed to be building empires couldn't even buy a cocktail. Sterling raised the megaphone now. He wasn't talking to Sarah anymore. He was talking to the crowd. "The kitchen is closed," Sterling announced, his voice amplified and distorted, echoing off the walls like the voice of doom. "The bar is closed. Security is currently escorting the valet staff off the premises. If you want your cars, I suggest you retrieve your keys from the front desk immediately. You have 10 minutes to vacate the property before we lock the main gates." The panic set in instantly. It wasn't the panic of danger. It was the panic of inconvenience. The elite guests, the people Sarah had so desperately wanted to impress, didn't rally around her. They didn't offer support. They scrambled. I watched as women in $5,000 gowns shoved past each other to get to the doors. I watched men in tuxedos shouting into their phones, calling their drivers, demanding to be picked up. The waiters continued their work, relentless and efficient. They stripped the tablecloths off the tables while people were still standing next to them. The sound of silverware crashing into bins was the soundtrack to the exodus. Sarah stood alone on the stage. Jason had vanished into the crowd, slipping away like a thief in the night. She looked at the empty tables. She looked at the half-eaten food being carted away. She looked at the darkness that surrounded her. She looked exactly like the little girl who used to throw tantrums in the grocery store when I wouldn't buy her candy. But this time, I wasn't there to pick her up. I wasn't there to smooth it over. I took a sip of my whiskey. It was warm now, but I didn't mind. The show wasn't over. The rats were fleeing the ship, but the captain was still on board, and the ship was sinking fast. I saw the two actors, Gary and Linda, the fake parents, stand up from the head table. They didn't look panicked. They looked annoyed. Gary checked his watch. Linda picked up her purse. They walked over to Sarah, who was staring blankly into the middle distance. I turned up the volume. I didn't want to miss this. "Hey, honey," Gary said, tapping Sarah on the arm. "Look, sorry about the drama, but our contract says we get paid at the end of the event, or at 9 p.m., whichever comes first. It's 8,000 churros, but the event is technically over." Sarah looked at him, her eyes unfocused. "What? The fee?" Linda said, her voice sharp. $200 an hour. We've been here for 4 hours, plus the travel stipend. That's $1,000. Cash or Venmo?" Sarah blinked. "Who are you?" "I'm Gary. This is Linda," the man said. "We're the talent. Jason hired us through Gigmasters to play his parents. Look, lady, are you going to pay us, or do we have to file a dispute with the app?" Sarah's knees gave out. She sat down hard on the edge of the stage, her expensive dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. "Actors," she whispered. "You're actors. We're professionals," Linda huffed. "And professionals get paid. Where is Jason?" "He ran," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, dead. "He ran away." I watched from my cabin miles away as the reality of her choices crashed down on her. She was alone in the dark, wearing a dress she didn't own, married to a fraud, abandoned by the father she had banned. It was the most expensive lesson I had ever taught her, and class was just beginning. I watched the screen as the woman Sarah believed to be her mother-in-law unclasped her purse. The movement was sharp, devoid of the graceful, aristocratic languor she had displayed all evening. Linda, the $200 an hour extra, was done performing. She reached into her clutch, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and lit one right there at the head table. The flame from her lighter flared in the gloom, a tiny beacon of rebellion against the sudden austerity of the room. The smoke curled up toward the dead chandelier. It was the ultimate breach of etiquette in a venue that prided itself on exclusivity, but Linda clearly didn't care about the rules of a game that had just been canceled. She took a long drag, exhaled a gray plume into the face of a stunned bridesmaid, and turned her attention to my daughter. Sarah was still slumped on the stage, her expensive dress pooling around her like a puddle of spilt milk. She looked up at the woman, her eyes wide and wet, seeking comfort. She reached out a trembling hand, perhaps expecting the maternal warmth that Linda had been contracted to provide for the past 6 hours. Mom, Clara whimpered. Her voice was thin, barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. Mom, what do we do? Linda looked at her. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a hug. She checked her wristwatch, tapping the glass face with a manicured fingernail. Don't call me Mom, honey, Linda said. Her voice carried. It was a smoker's voice, raspy and hard, nothing like the cultured mid-Atlantic accent she had been using all night. The contract ended at 8 o'clock. It is 8:05. I am off the clock. And frankly, this working environment is unsafe. Sarah blinked, her brain misfiring as it tried to reconcile the woman in front of her with the character she had married into. Contract, Sarah whispered. Gary, the man playing the father, stepped forward. He loosened his bow tie, undoing the top button of his shirt with a sigh of relief. He looked down at Sarah with the expression of a contractor looking at a client whose check had bounced. Look, Lady Gary said, pointing a finger at her. We are professionals. We did the rehearsal dinner. We did the meet and greet. We sat through that hour-long ceremony without yawning once. We held up our end of the deal. But Jason explicitly stated we would be paid in cash immediately following the speeches. He looked around the darkened room, scanning the shadows for the groom who had vanished. We haven't been paid, Gary announced to the room. And I don't work for free. I have a car payment due on Tuesday. The guests nearest the stage stopped their frantic whispering. They leaned in. This was better than the wedding. This was a car crash in slow motion. You're actors, a woman in the front row asked. I recognized her. It was Sarah's college roommate, a girl who had always made Sarah feel inferior about her background. Gary turned to the crowd and gave a theatrical bow. Gary Henderson, SAG-AFTRA. Eligible at your service, he said. You might recognize me from the Tri-State Mattress Depot commercials. I'm the guy who sleeps on the cloud. A ripple of recognition went through the crowd. Someone laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Wait, a man shouted from table 4. You told me you made your fortune in offshore drilling. We spent 20 minutes talking about oil futures. I improvised, Gary shrugged. It is called method acting. I Googled it in the car on the way over. The humiliation was expanding, radiating outward from Sarah like a shockwave. She scrambled to her feet, her heels slipping on the polished floor. Stop it, she screamed. Stop talking. You are Jason's parents. You live in Martha's Vineyard. You have a yacht. Linda blew another stream of smoke into the air. Honey, I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens and I take the subway, she said flatly. The only yacht I have ever been on is the Staten Island ferry. Now, are you going to pay us, or do we have to call the police and report a theft of services? Sarah looked around wildly. Jason, she shrieked. Jason, tell them to stop. But Jason was gone. The rat had scurried off the ship the moment the water started rushing in. Sarah stood alone, surrounded by the wreckage of her lies. The 2 people she had used to validate her social climbing, the 2 people she had preferred over her own flesh and blood, were now shaking her down for petty cash in front of 200 witnesses. And then the phones came out. It started with 1 or 2, a discreet lift of a smartphone, a quick snap. But as the absurdity of the situation sank in, the floodgates opened. The guests, these people Sarah had curated so carefully, these friends she wanted to impress so desperately, turned on her. They weren't helping her. They were filming her. I watched on my screen as dozens of small rectangular lights illuminated the darkness. They were like fireflies surrounding a dying animal. The flashes popped, blinding Sarah, freezing her terror in high definition. I could see their lips moving. I didn't need audio to know what they were saying. They were live streaming. They were posting stories. They were typing hashtags. Wedding fail. Groom missing. Fake parents. Sarah covered her face with her hands. She tried to hide, but there was nowhere to go. She was trapped in the center of the room, illuminated by the merciless glow of social media. This is what she wanted, I thought, taking a sip of whiskey. She wanted to be the center of attention. She wanted to be viral. She wanted everyone to look at her. Well, they were looking now. One of the bridesmaids, a girl in a pink dress, who looked like she had cost more than my entire house, stepped up to the edge of the stage. She didn't offer a hand to help Sarah down. She held up her phone and started recording a selfie video with Sarah sobbing in the background. "Oh my God, you guys," the bridesmaid said, her voice carrying to the security mic. "You will not believe this. The groom is a fraud. The parents are paid actors, and the bride just got dumped at the altar because the checks bounced. This is literally the most insane thing I have ever seen." Sarah heard her. She lowered her hands. She looked at her friend. "Becky," Sarah whispered. "Please, don't." Becky didn't stop recording. She just pivoted to get a better angle of the fake mother smoking a cigarette. "This is gold," Becky said. I watched Sarah's posture collapse. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the crushing weight of realization. She was realizing that these people weren't her friends. They were an audience, and she had just become the entertainment. Linda stepped closer to Sarah, invading her personal space. "Look, sweetheart," Linda said, her voice dropping to a menacing growl. "Jason owes us $2,000. If he is not here, the debt falls to you. You are the bride. You are the partner. Pay up." "I don't have it," Sarah sobbed. "I don't have any money. Jason handled everything." "Then give me the ring," Linda said. I sat up straight in my chair. What Sarah gasped, clutching her left hand. "The ring," Linda repeated. She reached out and grabbed Sarah's wrist. "It looks like a 2-carat stone. If it is real, it will cover our fee. If it is cubic zirconia, I am going to be very upset." "No," Sarah screamed, trying to pull away. "It is my engagement ring." "It is collateral," Gary added, stepping in to block Sarah's retreat. "Hand it over and we walk. Don't hand it over and we call the cops. Theft of services is a misdemeanor, but with the amount involved here, we might be able to push for grand larceny if we pool our claims." The guests were laughing now. Not a polite titter, but a cruel, raucous laughter. They were cheering for the actors. They were chanting, "Give her the ring, give her the ring." It was a mob dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns. They had been denied their dinner, they had been denied their party, and now they wanted blood. They wanted a sacrifice. Sarah looked at the crowd. She looked at the faces of the people she admired, the people she had banned me to impress, and she saw nothing but mockery. She looked down at her hand. Her fingers were trembling so violently, the diamonds sparked in the gloom. "Fine," she screamed. Take it, and get out." She wrenched the ring off her finger. She didn't hand it to Linda. She threw it. The ring skittered across the floor, spinning like a top. Linda moved with surprising speed for a woman of her age. She snatched it up before it could roll into a vent. She held it up to the beam of an emergency light, squinting at it. "It looks decent," Linda judged. "Probably worth a pawn shop quick sale." She looked at Gary. "We're good." "We're good," Gary said. He looked at Sarah one last time. He didn't say sorry. He didn't say goodbye. He just buttoned his collar, fixed his tie, and slipped back into the character of a man who had better places to be. "Pleasure doing business with you," he said. The two actors turned and marched off the stage, pushing their way through the crowd of jeering guests. They exited through the service doors, vanishing into the night, with the symbol of my daughter's marriage in a pocket next to a pack of cigarettes. Sarah stood frozen. She looked at her bare hand. The pale strip of skin where the ring had been was the only clean thing left on her. The guests began to filter out. Their entertainment concluded. They didn't say goodbye to the bride. They walked past her as if she were a piece of furniture. I heard snippets of their conversations as they passed the microphones. What a disaster. I knew she was trash. Did you see the dad? Or the fake dad? Who even does that? Sarah sank to her knees on the dirty floor of the stage. The flowers were wilting in the heat of the unventilated room. The darkness was absolute now, save for the cruel spotlight of the exit signs. She was alone. Truly, completely alone. I reached for the bottle of whiskey. It was empty. Good, I thought. I didn't need to drink anymore. I needed a clear head for what came next. The destruction phase was over. The foundation had been blasted. The walls had crumbled. Now my daughter was sitting in the rubble. She pulled her knees to her chest and buried her face in her arms. Her shoulders shook. I watched her cry for a minute, 2 minutes, 5. She pulled her phone out of her dress pocket. I saw the screen light up her tear-streaked face. She dialed a number. My phone rang on the desk. I looked at the caller ID. Sarah. I didn't answer. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times, she needed to sit in the dark a little longer. She needed to understand that the man she had banned wasn't just a guest she could summon back when the party went wrong. I wasn't a backup plan. The ringing stopped. She lowered the phone. She looked at the screen confused. She wasn't used to me not answering. I had answered every call for 29 years. But tonight, the line was dead. She stood up shaky and unstable on her heels. She looked around the empty room one last time. She realized no one was coming to save her. Jason was gone. The fake parents were gone. The guests were gone. She had to walk out of there on her own 2 feet. I watched her take the first step off the stage. She stumbled, nearly falling, but caught herself on a chair. She kicked off her expensive shoes. She left them there, lying on the floor like dead birds. She started walking toward the exit barefoot. I closed the iPad cover. The screen went black. I knew where she was going. There was only one place left for her to go. I stood up and walked to the front door of my cabin. I unlocked it. But I didn't open it. I left the chain on. She was coming home. But home wasn't a refuge anymore. It was a checkpoint. And this time I was the one holding the list. The phone rang again. It was a shrill, desperate sound that cut through the quiet of my cabin. I looked at the caller ID glowing in the dark. Sarah. I let it ring 4 times. I wanted her to sit in that silence. I wanted her to feel the weight of the distance she had placed between us. On the 5th ring, I picked up. I didn't say hello, I just pressed the phone to my ear and waited. Dad Sarah screamed. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was raw, shredded by hysteria and confusion. Dad. What is happening? The manager says you cut the power. He says you own the trust. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them to turn the lights back on. I took a slow breath. I looked at the screen where she was pacing back and forth in the dark, clutching her phone like a lifeline. It is not a mistake, Sarah, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a man reading a weather report. I executed Clause 14C. I withdrew the funding. She laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound. You don't have any funding. You live in a shack. You drive a truck that barely runs. Jason paid for this, Jason and his family. Jason is gone, Sarah, I said. I watched on the screen as she spun around, looking at the empty shadows where her husband should have been. And his family. They were actors. Hourly employees. They left because their shift ended. That is a lie, she shrieked. You are jealous. You are trying to ruin me because I didn't invite you. You didn't just not invite me, Sarah, I corrected her. You banned me. I saw the photo at the gate. Do not let in. You treated me like a criminal. You treated the man who paid for your dress, your flowers, and your lobster dinner like trash. So I took the trash out. There was a silence on the line. Heavy. Suffocating. You paid, she whispered. Every penny I said. $212,000. Jason didn't pay a dime. His credit card was declined for a whiskey sour at the lobby bar an hour ago. He is broke, Sarah. He has been broke since the day you met him. No, she sobbed. No, he has millions. He has crypto. He has the company. He has debt, I said brutally. He has $500,000 in gambling debt. He married you for the cash gifts. He married you because he thought I had land he could sell. She was crying harder now, deep heaving sobs that shook her entire body. I watched her collapse onto a chair, pulling her knees to her chest. Dad, please, she whimpered. I am scared. It is dark. Everyone left. Jason isn't answering. Come get me, please. Bring the truck. I don't care about the truck anymore. Just come get me. I looked at the keys hanging by the door. I looked at the bottle of whiskey. I can't do that, Sarah, I said. Why, she cried. You are my dad, because I am banned, I reminded her. The security guard was very clear. If I show up, he calls the police. I don't want to cause a scene. I am respecting your wishes. Dad, stop it. Stop punishing me. I have no money. They took the car. How am I supposed to get home? You have feet, I said. It is 5 miles. The moon is bright tonight. You want me to walk in a wedding dress. I want you to understand what it feels like to be locked out, I said. I want you to understand that you cannot spit in the face of the hand that feeds you and expect it to keep serving you dinner. Start walking, Sarah. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I placed it gently back in the cradle. I watched on the screen as she stared at her phone in disbelief. She tapped the screen, trying to call back. I reached over and unplugged the line from the wall. Class was dismissed. The exam had begun. I watched the screen as a shadow detached itself from the heavy velvet curtains near the service entrance. It wasn't a ghost. It was a rat scurrying back to the sinking ship to see if there was anything left to steal. Jason stepped into the pool of emergency light, his movements jerky and frantic. He had lost his suit jacket. His shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing a gold chain that was almost certainly gold-plated brass. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at the table where the gift box had been sitting, the box meant to hold envelopes of cash from well-wishers. He reached the table and found nothing. The staff, efficient to the last, had cleared it along with the silverware. Jason slammed his fist onto the empty tablecloth. The sound was dull and pathetic. Jason, Sarah whispered. She scrambled up from the floor, her eyes lighting up with a flicker of desperate hope. She thought he had come back for her. She thought he was the hero returning to save the damsel from the darkness. You came back. She ran toward him, her bare feet slapping against the cold hardwood. She reached out, grabbing his arm with both hands. Jason, thank God. My dad, he went crazy. He cut the power. He said terrible things. We have to go. We have to leave. Jason spun around. He didn't hug her. He didn't comfort her. He ripped his arm out of her grasp with a violence that made her stumble back. Where is the money, Sarah? He hissed. His voice wasn't the smooth baritone he used for his investor pitches. It was high-tight and ugly. The cards, the envelopes, where did they put them? Sarah blinked, confused. The gifts, I don't know. The manager took everything. Jason. Why does that matter? We need to call the police. My dad. Shut up about your dad! Jason screamed. Spittle flew from his lips, illuminated by the harsh halogen light. Your dad is the reason I'm a dead man walking. He locked the accounts. He froze the transfer. Do you have any idea what you've done? Me. Sarah recoiled. I didn't do anything. I defended you. I banned him for you. You didn't ban him hard enough. Jason advanced on her, backing her toward the edge of the dance floor. You told me he was a pushover. You told me he was a simple construction worker with a nest egg we could crack open. You didn't tell me he was the shark who owns the tank. He grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging into her skin. "Do you have cash on you?" he demanded, shaking her. "In your purse in the bridal suite, I need 50,000, right now." 50,000, Sarah sobbed. "Jason, you're scaring me. Why do you need money? We're rich. You have the company." Jason laughed. It was a sound like glass breaking in a garbage disposal. "There is no company, you stupid cow," he spat. "There never was. It's a website. It cost me $12 to register the domain. I needed your credit score. I needed your dad's land. And now I have nothing because you couldn't keep your old man on a leash." I watched Sarah's face crumble. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was the total annihilation of her reality. The man she worshipped, the man she had placed on a pedestal above her own flesh and blood, was looking at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. You used me," she whispered. "I tried to use you," Jason corrected her. "But you turned out to be useless. You're just a broke girl with a rich daddy who hates her. You're a liability." Then on the edge of the camera frame, I saw movement at the rear service doors. The ones I had instructed Henderson to unlock remotely 3 minutes ago. 3 men stepped into the ballroom. They didn't look like wedding guests. They wore leather jackets that were too heavy for the season and expressions that were too calm for the situation. They walked with the heavy planted steps of men who are used to walking through walls. I recognized the one in the middle. It was Vinny. The loan shark Reynolds had identified in the dossier. Jason saw them too. He froze. His grip on Sarah's shoulders tightened until she cried out in pain. "Jason," Vinny called out. His voice was casual, friendly even. It echoed through the empty cavern of the ballroom. "Leaving so soon? We haven't had a chance to toast the happy couple." Jason spun Sarah around, positioning her between himself and the men. He used my daughter as a human shield. "Vinny," Jason stammered, peering over Sarah's shoulder. "Look, there's been a mix-up. The wire transfer got flagged. Security protocol. You know how banks are. I'll have it Monday, first thing." Vinny kept walking. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. "Monday is a long way away, Jason," Vinny said. "And my associates get nervous over the weekend. We heard the wedding got canceled. We heard the money got pulled. That makes us think you might be planning a vacation." "No," Jason yelped. "No vacation. Look, she has it." He shoved Sarah forward, pushing her toward the men. "She's the one with the money," Jason shouted. "Her dad is William Carter. He owns this whole place. Take her, hold her for ransom. He'll pay, he loves her." Sarah stumbled, catching her balance just before she reached Vinny. She looked back at her husband with wide, horrified eyes. "Jason," she gasped. "What are you saying? Give them your jewelry." Jason screamed at her. "The necklace, the earrings, give it to them." It's fake," Sarah whispered, her hand going to her throat. "You told me it was vintage, but I took it to get cleaned. It's paste. You bought it at a kiosk." Jason's face twisted into a mask of pure fury. His last asset, his last bargaining chip, was worthless. He had conned himself. Vinny stopped 5 feet away. He looked at Sarah, shivering in her dress. He looked at the fake diamonds around her neck. He shook his head. "We don't want the girl, Jason," Vinny said calmly. "We want you. You signed the marker." Jason looked left. He looked right. He realized there was nowhere to go. The men were blocking the only exit he knew was open. Panic took over. The animal instinct of a trapped rat kicked in. He grabbed Sarah one last time. Not to hold her, not to save her. He grabbed the bodice of her dress and heaved. "Get out of my way!" he shrieked. He shoved her. He didn't just push her aside. He threw her. He put all his weight, all his fear, and all his failure into one violent motion. Sarah flew backward. Her feet, tangled in the layers of tulle and silk, couldn't find purchase on the slick floor. She went airborne for a fraction of a second, a white cloud suspended in the darkness. She crashed down onto the centerpiece of table 4, which the staff had placed on the floor during the cleanup. It was a massive arrangement of white roses and hydrangeas soaking in a vase of water. Sarah hit it with a sickening crunch. The vase shattered. Water splashed everywhere, mixing with the dirt from the overturned pot. She rolled off the debris and landed hard on the floor, her beautiful dress instantly soaking up the mud, the water, and the crushed petals. She lay there sprawled amidst the ruin of her perfection. White petals stuck to her wet hair. Her dress was torn at the shoulder. She looked like a fallen angel who had hit the ground too hard. Jason didn't look back. He used the distraction of her fall to bolt. He sprinted toward the kitchen doors, scrambling over chairs, knocking over a bus cart. "Get him," Vinny said softly. The two men flanking him moved. They were faster than they looked. They intercepted Jason before he could reach the swinging doors. One of them tackled him, sending him skidding across the polished wood. I watched as they hauled him up by his armpits. Jason was crying now, begging, promising, screaming. They dragged him out the back door into the night, where their car was waiting. Vinny looked at Sarah one last time. She was trying to push herself up, her hands slipping on the wet, flour-strewn floor. She was gasping for air, shock setting in. "Sorry about the mess, lady," Vinny said. "But you picked a loser." He turned and walked out, leaving Sarah alone in the center of the frame. I zoomed in on the camera feed. It was the image that would haunt me, but it was also the image that was necessary. Sarah was on her hands and knees. She was surrounded by broken glass and dying flowers. The white dress, the symbol of her vanity and her delusion, was ruined. It was gray, with dirty water, stained green with chlorophyll from the crushed stems. She lifted her head. Her makeup was running in black streaks down her face. She looked around the empty, silent room. "Daddy," she whispered. The microphone picked it up. It was a small sound, a broken sound. "Daddy, I'm hurt." I sat in my cabin. My finger hovered over the call button on my phone. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to go to her, to get in the truck, to drive through the gate, to pick her up and clean her off. But I pulled my hand back. If I picked her up now, she would never learn how to stand. If I cleaned her off, she would never understand the stain of her own choices. She had to sit in the flowers. She had to feel the cold water. She had to look at the wreckage she had invited into her life. This was the bottom, and she had to hit it alone. The security gates of Golden Oaks clicked shut with a mechanical finality that sounded like a prison door locking. But Sarah wasn't on the inside anymore. She was on the outside. The pavement where my truck had leaked oil that morning was now the starting line of her penance. She stood there for a long time under the yellow glow of the street lamp. I couldn't see her anymore. The resort cameras didn't reach the county road, but I knew exactly what she was looking at. She was looking at 5 miles of asphalt, gravel, and darkness. She was looking at a road she had traveled 1,000 times in the back of my truck, as a child complaining about the bumps. Now she had to feel every single bump against the soles of her feet. She took the first step. She was still wearing one shoe. The other had been lost somewhere in the lobby, kicked off in her frantic pursuit of a husband who had already abandoned her. She tried to walk with an uneven, limping gait, the remaining stiletto heel cracking against the tarmac, like a metronome counting down her misery. Click, scrape, click, scrape. After 100 yards, she stopped. She sat on the guardrail, the metal cold and damp against her skin. She unbuckled the remaining shoe and threw it into the ditch. It landed in the tall grass, a $1,000 piece of Italian leather, discarded like a fast food wrapper. Now she was barefoot. Her pedicure, a soft shell pink she had shown off on Instagram just yesterday, didn't stand a chance against County Road 9. The asphalt was old. It was rough, pitted with potholes and scattered with loose gravel. She started walking again. This time there was no clicking. There was just the soft, wet slap of skin on stone. A car approached from behind. I imagine she turned, waving her arms, the diamonds on her bracelet catching the headlights. She probably thought it was a guest. Maybe Becky. Maybe one of the groomsmen who had toasted to her eternal happiness an hour ago. The car didn't slow down. It swerved slightly to avoid the woman in the dirty white dress staggering along the shoulder, then accelerated. The wind from its passing whipped her hair across her face and sprayed gravel against her legs. They didn't see a bride. They saw a crazy woman walking alone in the dark. They saw trouble. She kept walking. The adrenaline of the ballroom was fading, replaced by the dull, throbbing ache of reality. Her dress, the custom silk masterpiece, was heavy. It had soaked up the water from the flower vase, and now it was soaking up the dew from the roadside weeds. It dragged behind her, collecting burrs, twigs, and mud. It wasn't a gown anymore. It was an anchor. She had to bunch the fabric up in her hands, holding it to her chest like a bundle of dirty laundry, just to keep moving. Mile 2. The blisters would have started by now. Soft skin rubbing against rough pavement. The friction turning into heat, then into fluid, then into raw, exposed nerves. She stepped on a sharp stone. She cried out. I know she did. She sat down right there in the middle of the road to check her foot. In the moonlight, the blood would look black. She probably checked her phone again. She had service out here. She could see the notifications rolling in, the tags, the comments. The world wasn't sleeping. The world was laughing. Every step she took away from the resort was a step deeper into viral infamy. She wasn't just walking home. She was walking through a digital hallway of mirrors, every reflection distorted and mocking. She called Jason again. Straight to voicemail. She called Becky. Straight to voicemail. She called her mother's old number, a number that had been disconnected for 10 years, just to hear a voice that wouldn't judge her. She stood up. She was limping for real now. The cold was setting in. The night air in the valley drops quickly. She was wearing thin silk and desperation. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently. Mile 3. This was the stretch of road with no streetlights. Just the canopy of oak trees blocking out the moon. It was pitch black. The sounds of the night, the crickets, the rustling in the bushes, the hoot of an owl would sound like monsters to a girl who had spent the last 5 years in the city. She was afraid of the dark. She always had been. I used to leave the hall light on for her. Tonight, the only light was the distant glow of my cabin, a tiny pinprick of yellow miles away. She started to run. A clumsy, hobbling jog. She wanted to get out of the dark. She wanted the safety of the place she had called a shack. The irony must have tasted like ash in her mouth. The luxury resort had kicked her out. The penthouse was a lie. The shack was the only roof left in the world that wouldn't charge her admission. She tripped. It was inevitable. Exhaustion, darkness, and uneven ground are a brutal combination. She went down hard on her hands and knees. The gravel chewed into her palms. She didn't get up immediately. She stayed there on all fours, gasping for air, vomiting up the emptiness in her stomach. She looked at her hands. They were scraped, bleeding, dirty. They looked just like my hands. She had spent her entire adult life trying to scrub the construction worker out of her DNA. She got manicures. She used expensive lotions. She wore gloves when she drove. But now, kneeling in the dirt, mixing her blood with the earth, she was exactly who she was trying to escape. She was a Carter. She was down in the mud. She pulled herself up. She was crying a low, keening sound that had no audience but the trees. She didn't wipe her face. She just let the tears mix with the road dust streaking her cheeks. Mile 4. She could see the outline of my property line, the fence I had built, the gate she had driven past a week ago in a Porsche, laughing at its simplicity. Now that gate looked like the pearly gates of heaven. She dragged her feet. One step, another. She was leaving a trail of bloody footprints on the asphalt. She was stripping away the layers of pretension with every agonizing yard. The entitlement was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was survival. She reached the turnoff for my driveway. The gravel here was fresh, sharp. It must have felt like walking on broken glass. She saw the lights of the cabin. She saw my truck parked out front. The truck she hated. The truck she banned. She didn't look at it with disgust tonight. She looked at it with longing. She walked past the hood, her hand trailing along the rusted fender, needing something solid to hold onto. She stumbled up the 3 wooden steps to the porch. She stood in front of the door. She raised a hand that was shaking bloody and stripped of its diamond ring. She didn't knock. She collapsed against the wood, sliding down until she was a heap of ruined white silk on my welcome mat. She had walked 5 miles through hell to get back to the start, but she hadn't crossed the finish line yet. The door was locked, and I was on the other side waiting. I heard the thud of her body hitting the wood, followed by a low, guttural sob that vibrated through the doorframe. Then came the pounding. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the frantic, terrifying hammering of someone who knows the wolves are nipping at their heels. I stood on the other side of the oak door, my hand resting on the deadbolt. I could hear her breathing, ragged and wet like a swimmer, surfacing from a near drowning. "Open the door," she screamed. Her voice was cracked raw from 5 miles of crying in the dark. "Dad, open the damn door." "It's me," I unlocked the deadbolt. The metal slide clicked back with a heavy mechanical snap. I turned the knob, but I didn't swing the door wide. I had engaged the security chain earlier, a thick link of hardened steel. The door opened 4 inches, just enough to see her, just enough for her to see me. The slice of her face visible through the gap was a portrait of ruin. Her hair was matted with mud and leaves. Her mascara had pooled into black bruises under her eyes. There was a cut on her cheek oozing blood that mixed with the road dust. She smelled of swamp water sweat and expensive perfume that had turned sour. She shoved her hand into the gap, trying to reach the chain, trying to force her way in. Her fingers were scraped and bloody, the manicure chipped away to jagged edges. "Let me in," she gasped, clawing at the air. "It's freezing. I'm hurt. Let me in right now." I didn't move to undo the chain. I stood there holding a glass of water I had poured but hadn't drunk. I looked at her fingers, grasping for purchase in a home she had mocked a week ago. "You can't come in, Sarah," I said. My voice was low. It didn't carry any anger. Anger is hot. This was 0 degrees. "What?" She stopped clawing. She put her eye to the crack, staring at me with a wild, disbelieving look. "What did you say?" "I said you can't come in," I repeated. "You made it very clear that I don't fit into your life. You put up a sign. You hired a guard. You drew a line. This threshold is that line. You stay on your side." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half scream. "Are you insane? I walked 5 miles. I'm bleeding. Jason left me. He stole everything. You ruined my wedding. You crazy old man. And now you're going to leave me on the porch." "I didn't ruin your wedding, Sarah," I said. "I just stopped paying for the lie. There is a difference." She slammed her shoulder against the door. The chain rattled but held. It was bolted into the frame with 3-inch screws. "I installed them myself." "You stopped paying," she shrieked. "You think that gives you the right to humiliate me? To verify my humiliation in front of everyone I know, Jason is going to sue you. He's going to take this shack and turn it into firewood." I took a sip of water. The coolness of it felt grounding. "Jason isn't going to sue anyone, Sarah," I said. "Jason is currently in the back of a black SUV explaining to a man named Vinny why he doesn't have $50,000. She froze. The mention of the name made her pause. "Vinny, who is Vinny? Vinny is a loan shark," I explained patiently, as if I were teaching her how to read a tape measure. He holds the note on Jason's gambling debts. $540,000, Sarah. That's what your husband owes. That's why he married you. He needed the cash gifts to buy another week of life. You're lying, she whispered, pressing her forehead against the door jamb. He owns Nebulous Systems. He's a tech genius. I reached back to the small table in the hallway where I had left the dossier. I picked up the single sheet of paper summarizing the background check. I folded it lengthwise and slid it through the crack in the door. Read it, I said. She snatched the paper. I watched through this gap as she unfolded it with trembling hands. The porch light flickered above her, illuminating the text. I saw her eyes darting back and forth. Employment history, car rental clerk, cell phone kiosk, terminated for theft, credit score 420. Outstanding judgments, 6. She dropped the paper. It fluttered to the porch floor, landing in a puddle of mud. It's fake, she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. You forged it. You always hated him because he was successful, because he was sophisticated, because he wasn't a laborer like you. I looked at her, really looked at her. She was shivering violently now. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving only the cold reality of the night. I hated him because he was a con man, Sarah. And I hated him because he convinced you that your father, the man who built the roof over your head for 18 years, wasn't good enough to sit at a table and eat a chicken dinner. She started crying again. It was a manipulative cry this time, the kind she used to use when she wanted a new phone or a later curfew. Daddy, please, she sobbed. I'm sorry about the sign. Okay, I'm sorry. It was Jason's idea. He said his parents were judgmental. He said they wouldn't understand your lifestyle. I was just trying to keep the peace. I was trying to protect you from being embarrassed. Protect me? I asked. I leaned closer to the door. You weren't protecting me, Sarah. You were protecting your fantasy. You were ashamed. You looked at my truck and you saw failure. You looked at my hands and you saw dirt. You didn't see the work. You didn't see the sacrifice. You just saw something ugly that didn't match your Instagram feed. I'm sorry, she yelled, pounding the wood again. I said, I'm sorry. Now open the door. I have nowhere else to go. They kicked me out of the apartment. I know, I said. I canceled the lease guarantee. You what? She stepped back, her eyes wide. You were the guarantor. Who do you think paid the rent when Jason's mysterious wire transfers didn't come through? I asked. Who do you think paid for your car insurance? Who do you think paid for this dress you are ruining right now? She looked down at her dress. She touched the torn silk. You paid, she whispered, for everything I said. For 3 years, Sarah. Every time you needed money, every time there was an emergency, every time Jason had a cash flow problem. It was me. I funneled it through shell accounts so you wouldn't know. I wanted you to feel independent. I wanted you to feel proud. But I was the safety net. And tonight I cut the ropes. Why, she screamed. Why would you do that if you have the money? Why do you live here? Why do you drive that truck? Why do you dress like a bum? You tricked me. You made me think you were poor. I didn't make you think anything. I said, my voice hardening. You assumed. You looked at the surface and you stopped looking. You judged a book by its cover because you never bothered to open the pages. You never asked me about my business. You never asked me about my investments. You just asked me for checks. I have money, Sarah, I continued. I have more money than Jason could steal in 10 lifetimes. I own the resort you were married in. I own the land under this cabin and 300 apartments in the city. I am a wealthy man, but I live here because this is the house I built with your mother. I drive that truck because it still runs, and I don't need a Mercedes to know who I am. She stared at me through the crack. The revelation was hitting her like physical blows. The greed was starting to war with the shame in her eyes. I could see the gears turning. She was realizing that she had bet on the wrong horse. She had thrown away a millionaire father for a bankrupt husband. "Dad," she said, her voice changing. It became softer, wheedling. "Dad, if you have all that, then we can fix this. We can pay off Jason's debt. We can get the apartment back. You can help me. I'm your daughter. You can't leave me out here. I'm your only child." I looked at the chain. It was straining against the screws as she leaned her weight on the door. "I am not going to help you, Sarah," I said. "Not with money. Not anymore." "What?" She recoiled. "You have to. It's your duty." "My duty was to raise a good person," I said. "And somewhere along the line I failed. I gave you too much. I shielded you from too much. I let you believe that the world owed you a living. I let you believe that you were better than the people who serve your food and pick up your trash. I am better," she snapped, the mask slipping. "I have a degree. I am a creative director. You are a receptionist with a fancy title, Sarah," I said bluntly. "And as of tonight, you are homeless. You are jobless, because I know for a fact you used the company credit card to pay for the florist deposit, and when I flag that transaction as fraudulent, your boss is going to fire you. You are nothing but what you can build with your own 2 hands. And right now your hands are empty." She stared at her empty hands. She looked at the bloody palms. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're just going to let me die out here. You're going to let me freeze because I hurt your feelings." "I'm not letting you die," I said. "And this isn't about my feelings. My feelings died when I saw that sign. This is about your character. You are broken, Sarah. You are fundamentally broken. You think people are disposable. You think family is a transaction. You think love is something you perform for an audience." I unlocked the chain. She gasped, surging forward, ready to push the door open. I slammed my foot against the base of the door, stopping it cold. I held it there, my boot wedged against the wood. I looked her in the eye, inches away. "I'm not letting you in," I said. "If I let you in, you will take a hot shower. You will eat my food. You will sleep in your old bed. And in the morning, you will wake up and you will hate me again. You will hate me for seeing you like this. You will hate me for having the money you want. You will start plotting how to get it. You will learn nothing." "Then what do you want me to do?" she screamed, spit flying onto my face. "Where am I supposed to go?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a key. It was a single silver key on a plain ring. I tossed it through the crack. It landed on the porch with a metallic ping. "That is the key to Unit 4B at the tenements on 4th Street, I said. "It's a studio apartment. It has a hot plate and a mattress. I paid the rent for 1 month. There is a bus pass on the counter and an application for a waitress job at the diner downstairs." "The tenements," she gasped. "That's the slums. That's where you grew up." "Exactly," I said. "That is where I started. That is where I learned that you don't get to eat if you don't work. That is where I learned that a man's worth isn't his suit, it's his word." "I am not living there," she shouted. "I am Sarah Carter. You are Sarah." "Nothing," I corrected her, "until you can prove otherwise." She looked at the key lying in the dirt. She looked at me. "I hate you," she hissed. "I hate you more than anything in the world." "I know," I said softly, "and that is why you can't come in, because you only love what I can give you. You don't love me." I stepped back. "Dad, wait," she cried, sensing the end. "Dad, please, it's dark, I'm scared, you should be," I said. "The world is a scary place when you don't have a daddy to pay the bills." I started to close the door. "Dad," she screamed. "Dad, I'm sorry, I'll do anything." "Pick up the key, Sarah," I said through the narrowing gap. "Pick up the key and start walking. The bus stop is a mile down the road. The last bus runs at 4 a.m. You have time. But my feet, she sobbed. They'll heal, I said. Feet get tough when you use them. I am not being cruel, Sarah, I said, looking at her one last time. Her face was a mask of tragedy lit by the porch light. I am teaching you the lesson you missed 10 years ago. I am teaching you how to survive without a safety net. I am giving you the only gift I have left to give. I am giving you a bottom. I slammed the door. I threw the deadbolt. I slid the chain back into place. I heard her scream. It was a sound of pure, impotent rage. She pounded on the door for another 10 minutes. She cursed me. She cursed Jason. She cursed the world. Then silence. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I heard a scuffling sound on the porch. Then the sound of slow, limping footsteps walking away. I went to the window and peered through the blinds. She was walking down the driveway. She was holding her dress up with one hand. In the other hand, clutched tight like a weapon, was the silver key. She was heading toward the road, toward the bus stop, toward the bottom. I turned off the porch light. The lesson had begun. I parked my truck across the street from the tenement building on 4th Street and waited in the dark cab. I had driven the back roads, taking the shortcut I knew from my days as a framing contractor, beating Sarah there by 20 minutes. I watched the bus stop down the block. It was empty. The streetlights flickered with a dying yellow buzz, illuminating the cracked sidewalk and the overflowing dumpsters that lined the curb. This was the part of town the city council forgot to pave. This was the part of town where sirens were background noise and hope was a currency that traded low. 20 minutes later, I saw her. She emerged from the shadows of the alleyway, limping badly. She had walked the whole way. She hadn't waited for the bus. Perhaps she was too ashamed to be seen in her ruined wedding dress under the fluorescent lights of public transit. Perhaps she just needed to punish herself. She looked like a specter haunting the streets, a gray, muddy figure dragging a train of silk that was now nothing more than a rag. She stopped in front of the building. It was a 4-story brick structure that had seen better days in the 1950s. The windows were barred. The front door was steel-dented from years of being kicked open. She looked at the number above the door. 412. She looked at the silver key in her hand. She was trembling so hard I could see it from across the street. I got out of the truck. I slammed the door. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet street. Sarah jumped. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror. When she saw it was me, her shoulders slumped. She didn't look relieved. She looked defeated. "You beat me here," she whispered. Her voice was a rasp. "I own the building, Sarah," I said, crossing the street. "I know the shortcuts." She looked up at the facade. A baby was crying in an apartment on the 2nd floor. A couple was arguing loudly on the 3rd. The smell of stale beer and boiled cabbage hung in the humid air. "This is it?" she asked. "This is where you want me to live?" "This is where you are going to live," I corrected her. "Come on." I walked past her and pushed the front door open. The lock was broken. It had been broken for 10 years. I held it for her. She hesitated, looking at the dark graffiti-covered hallway. Then she stepped inside. We walked up the stairs in silence. The elevator was out of order, wrapped in yellow caution tape. We climbed to the 4th floor. The stairwell smelled of bleach and urine. Sarah gagged, covering her nose with her hand, but she kept climbing. She had no choice. The alternative was the street. We reached apartment 4B. I took the key from her shaking hand and unlocked the door. I pushed it open and flipped the light switch. A single bare bulb in the center of the ceiling flickered to life, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the studio. It was small, maybe 300 square feet. The floor was linoleum peeling at the corners. There was a single twin mattress on the floor in the corner, made up with clean but cheap sheets. There was a small table with one chair. A hot plate sat on the counter next to a mini fridge. The walls were painted a color that was supposed to be cream but looked more like nicotine stain. Sarah walked into the center of the room. She turned in a slow circle. She looked at the barred window that looked out onto a brick wall. She looked at the bathroom door, which didn't quite close all the way. "It is a prison," she whispered. "It is a start," I said. I closed the door behind us and leaned against it. "This isn't punishment, Sarah," I said. "This is history. You don't remember this place, do you?" She looked at me, confusion clouding her exhaustion. "Why would I remember this dump? Because you lived here," I said. "For the first 2 years of your life. This apartment, Unit 4B. This is where I brought you and your mother after the hospital. This is where I learned to mix concrete during the day and study blueprints at night. This is where your mother sewed curtains from scrap fabric to make it feel like a home." She stared at the walls as if trying to see the ghosts of her past. "We were happy here," I continued. "We didn't have money. We didn't have status. But we had each other. And we had a dream. We worked our way out of this room, Sarah. We didn't marry our way out. We didn't scam our way out. We built our way out." I walked over to the small table. There was a folder sitting on it. I opened it. "This is the deal," I said. My voice was hard, leaving no room for negotiation. "I have paid the rent on this unit for 1 year. The utilities are in your name, prepaid for 3 months. After that, you are on your own." I pointed to the application form sitting next to the folder. "That is an application for the diner downstairs. Sal's place. I know the owner. He is expecting you tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. for a shift. It pays minimum wage plus tips. You will wear a uniform. You will serve coffee. You will clean tables. And you will smile while you do it." "I can't be a waitress," she sobbed. "I have a degree in art history." "Your degree didn't teach you how to spot a con man," I said. "Maybe waiting tables will teach you how to spot a hungry person. You need to learn the difference between want and need." I pulled a prepaid flip phone out of my pocket and tossed it onto the mattress. "That is your phone. It has my number programmed into it. It has the police. It has the fire department. It does not have Instagram. It does not have your friends' numbers. You are going to be offline, Sarah. You are going to disappear from the world you tried so hard to impress." She looked at the cheap plastic phone. It looked like a toy compared to the smartphone she had lost. "And if I say no," she asked, her voice trembling. "If I leave?" "Then you leave," I said. "The door is unlocked. But if you walk out that door, Sarah, you are walking out of my life forever. No inheritance, no contact, no safety net. You become a stranger to me." I paused, letting the weight of the ultimatum settle on her shoulders, but I added my voice, softening just a fraction. "If you stay, if you stick it out for 1 year, if you can prove to me that you can live on what you earn, that you can stand on your own 2 feet without leaning on a man or a trust fund, then we talk. Talk about what," she asked, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "About a job," I said. "A real job. In my company. Not as a director, not as a VP, but as an entry-level associate. You will learn the business from the ground up. You will learn what it actually means to build something." She looked at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, and devoid of the arrogance that had defined her for a decade. She looked at the mattress on the floor. She looked at the hot plate. She looked at the ruined dress she was wearing, a costume for a play that had been canceled. She realized then that she had no cards left to play. Jason had taken her future. I had taken her cushion. She was stripped bare. I watched the fight go out of her. Her shoulders dropped. Her head bowed. "Okay," she whispered. What I asked. I wanted to hear it. Okay, she said louder. I'll stay, I'll do it. Good, I said. I walked to the door. I placed my hand on the knob. There are clothes in the closet, I said. I went to Target. Jeans, t-shirts, work shoes. Get out of that dress, Sarah. Burn it. It doesn't fit you anymore. I opened the door. Dad, she called out. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. Yeah. Did you really ban yourself? She asked. Did you really put that sign up? I looked at the dark hallway. No, Sarah, I said. You put the sign up. I just enforced it. I walked out and closed the door. I heard the lock click behind me. I stood there for a moment in the smelly hallway listening. I heard her walking across the linoleum. I heard the rustle of the dress. And then I heard the sound of the shower turning on. She was washing off the mud. She was washing off the makeup. She was washing off the lie. I walked down the stairs, my boots heavy on the steps. I got into my truck and started the engine. I didn't drive home immediately. I sat there for a long time watching the window of apartment 4B. The light stayed on. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Leaving my child in a place like that. Leaving her to scrub dishes and count pennies. Every instinct as a father was to run back up there, wrap her in a blanket, and take her back to the cabin. To tell her it was all a bad dream. But a parent's job isn't just to protect their children from the world. It is to prepare them for it. And Sarah wasn't prepared. She was soft. She was entitled. She was weak. If I saved her now, she would stay weak forever. If I let her break, she might just have a chance to rebuild herself into something stronger. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time all day I felt a flicker of hope. She hadn't run. She hadn't quit. She had stayed. The demolition was over. The foundation was poured. Now the real work could begin. I watched the seasons change from the cab of my truck parked down the block. Summer turned to autumn, stripping the leaves from the trees on 4th Street, leaving the tenement building exposed and ugly against the gray sky. Then winter came, frosting the windows of apartment 4B with ice patterns that looked like prison bars. I never went inside. I never called, but I saw her. I saw her leave the building every morning at 5:30. In the beginning, she walked with her head down, her shoulders hunched against the wind, wearing the cheap coat I had left in the closet. She looked miserable. She looked like a woman serving a sentence. But as the months ground on, her posture changed. Her stride lengthened. She stopped looking at her feet and started looking at the horizon. I went to Sal's diner sometimes, always sitting in the back booth, where the shadows were deep, wearing a baseball cap pulled low. I watched her work. It was brutal. The morning rush at Sal's is a combat zone of clattering plates, screaming orders, and customers who think a $3 tip gives them the right to treat the staff like servants. I saw a man in a suit snap his fingers at her because his toast was cold. "Excuse me, sweetie," the man barked. "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. This is garbage. Take it back." The old Sarah would have thrown the plate at him. The old Sarah would have told him that her shoes cost more than his car. But this Sarah didn't flinch. She picked up the plate. "I apologize, sir," she said. Her voice was flat professional. "I will get you a fresh order right away." She walked back to the kitchen, dodging a busboy carrying a tower of dirty dishes. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just fixed the problem. I watched her count her tips at the end of a shift. She sat at the counter, her uniform stained with coffee and ketchup, sorting crumpled singles and silver coins into neat stacks. I saw her lips moving, doing the math. Rent, electricity, food, bus fare. One Tuesday in March, I followed her to the grocery store. She wasn't at Whole Foods. She was at the discount market where the fluorescent lights hummed and the produce was always slightly bruised. She had a basket, not a cart. She picked up a package of ground beef. She looked at the price tag. She put it back. She picked up a box of store-brand pasta instead. She stood in the checkout line counting out exact change from a small plastic coin purse. She was 5 cents short. The cashier, a tired teenager, sighed. I saw Sarah's face turn red. Not with anger, but with genuine shame. She didn't ask to speak to the manager. She didn't pull out a credit card that wasn't hers. "Take the apple off," Sarah said quietly. "I don't need the apple." That was the moment I knew. The entitlement had been burned out of her. It had been replaced by the hard, cold reality of arithmetic. She had learned the most important lesson of economics. You cannot spend what you do not earn. Spring arrived. The ice melted. Sarah was still there. She hadn't run to a friend. She hadn't found a new rich boyfriend to rescue her. She was working double shifts. She was tired. She was thin. Her hands were chapped from bleach and dishwater, but her eyes were clear. The frantic, desperate look of the girl on my porch was gone. In its place was the steady gaze of a woman who knows she can survive the dark. Exactly 1 year to the day after the wedding, I walked into Sal's diner at 10 in the morning. The breakfast rush was over. The place smelled of bacon grease and sanitizer. I didn't sit in the back. I sat at a booth by the window. The bell on the door chimed. Sarah was behind the counter wiping down the pie case. She looked up. She froze. The rag in her hand stopped moving. She looked at me. I looked at her. She didn't run to me. She didn't scream, "Dad." She put the rag down. She picked up a coffee pot and a mug. She walked around the counter and approached my table. She poured the coffee. Black, no sugar. Just the way I take it. "Hello, Dad," she said. Her voice was steady. "Hello, Sarah," I said. She put the pot down. She pulled a pad of paper from her apron pocket. "What can I get you?" she asked. "The special is meatloaf. It's actually pretty good today. Sal made it fresh." I looked at her. She was wearing a name tag that said Sarah. No title, no pretension. Just her name. "I am not hungry," I said. "I came to talk business." "Business?" she asked. She didn't sit down. She stood there, respectful of the customer, respectful of the man. I reached into my jacket pocket. I didn't pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a single manila folder. I slid it across the laminated table. "Open it," I said. She wiped her hands on her apron before touching it. She opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was an employment contract. "Golden Oaks Resort," she read aloud. "Position: Junior Operations Associate." "It is entry level," I said. "You will report to the housekeeping manager. You will inspect rooms. You will handle guest complaints. You will work holidays. The pay is $45,000 a year. It is enough to rent a decent apartment, not a penthouse, but a home with heat that works." She looked up at me. Her eyes were wide. "You want me to work at the place where it happened. I want you to learn how to run it," I said. "I fired the general manager last week. He enjoyed humiliating you a little too much. I need someone who understands that building from the ground up. Someone who knows what it feels like to be locked out so they never lock out a paying customer again." She looked at the contract. Her thumb traced the logo of the resort. "And if I say no," she asked. "Then you stay here," I said. "You are a good waitress, Sarah. Sal likes you. You can make a life here. It is honest work." She closed the folder. She held it against her chest. "Why?" she asked. "Why now? Because you stayed," I said. "Because you paid for your pasta with pennies. Because you didn't call me once in 12 months to beg. You served your time, Sarah. You built your foundation. Now I am offering you the bricks to build the house." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She took a deep breath and nodded. "I accept," she said. "But on one condition." I raised an eyebrow. You are negotiating? I want to pay you back, she said. For the wedding, for the dress, for the rent you paid on the apartment upstairs. I know it will take me years, but I want a payment plan deducted from my salary. I looked at her. I saw the grit in her jaw. I saw the builder in her blood. Deal, I said. She reached out and took my hand. Her palm was rough. It had calluses. It felt like my hand. Table 4 needs coffee, she said, pulling away. I finish my shift at 2. Pick me up, then I'll be outside, I said. She turned and walked back to the counter. She didn't strut. She walked with purpose. I watched her go. I took a sip of the coffee she had poured. It was hot. It was strong. It was the best cup of coffee I had ever tasted. The sign at the gate was gone. The ban was lifted. My daughter was coming home. Not as a princess, but as a partner. And that was worth more than all the gold in the world. We live in a world obsessed with filters and facades, where we often mistake the packaging for the gift. Sarah chased a golden illusion and nearly lost the real treasure, the unwavering strength of family. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true worth isn't found in a bank account or a designer label, but in the calluses of hard work and the integrity of one's word. Sometimes the greatest act of love a parent can offer isn't giving their child the world on a silver platter, but stepping back and letting them build their own, even if they have to start from rock bottom. If you believe that respect must be earned and not bought, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice, resilience, and truth.